Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Work at Home Rockstar podcast. Today I am talking to a counselor, a coach, and author at chuckchapman.com. And what he does is he helps mostly men with relationship issues, making their needs a priority, and living in alignment with their values. So I'm super excited to be rocking out today with Chuck Chapman. Hey, Chuck, you ready to rock?
I'm ready to roll and
Right
rock. Let's
on.
do it.
Cool. So we always start off on a good note. So tell me a story of success in
Yeah,
your business that we can be inspired by.
sure. Yeah. So I think the most inspirational piece is that, I was stuck in a career that I kind of hated. I was working in advertising and marketing, and I had gone through my own personal development. And um, one of the things that happened to me along the way was I got cancer. I got thyroid cancer. I was 38 years old. And this was really kind of a wake-up call for me of like, what am I doing with my life? And, why am I showing up at a job that I hate every day? And I started working with a counselor. And, so I was a client first. And what I realized after working with this counselor was it was a gift, and such a gift I wanted to be able to give it to other people. And so I decided to go back to school and change careers in the mid part of my career and become a therapist. And as I started working as a therapist, then I also really realized how underserved men were. And not just that, but that men just they didn't have anybody to talk to. And so as I started providing more services geared towards men, what I found was not only did my business and success in business take off, but my personal gratification and happiness also took off. So it was a decision that I made to make a shift because I wasn't happy with what was going on. I had a crisis which made me really evaluate what was important to me. And I couldn't see myself stuck in a career for another, 20, 25 years and hating it.
Hmm.
I really, doing something that for me felt like I was not only giving back, but being of service. Um, that's where I found my gratification at. And
Wow.
so I think that, the most successful thing I think was just making that decision to do it. It was tough. I mean, I was working full time, had a family, and going to school at night to try to make this thing happen. But um, I've never looked back and thought, I want to go back to work for somebody else. In fact, one of the things I sort of tell my friends is like, I'm a terrible employee. That's why I quit my job is because I needed to work for myself. Really not good at taking orders and, you know, being told what to do.
Man,
And maybe that's sort of my rebellious rock star.
I hear you, man. That's same here. I'm definitely not employable anymore. And I'm
Yeah,
surprised that some people are.
I know. Yeah.
You know, it is one of those things, but I mean, there is something for everybody for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your story is great, and I mean, kudos for you for actually seeking that help. Because I mean, we talked about this a little bit before
Yeah.
we hit record, and men tend to not really look for help. We
Yeah.
sort of suffer in silence, right? And just say, well,
Hmm.
just gotta suck it up and walk it off, and all those terms that we hear, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you
It's
think
kind
made
of
you
the
different? Why did you decide to reach out?
Well, I think there were a number of things happening. One was my wife at the time was also going to counseling. And it was one of those things where, you know, the, she suggested, was like maybe you should go see a counselor. And uh, I, kind of thought about it a little bit, but ultimately, like my life was such a train wreck that it was like, okay, I'm willing to do anything to try to figure this thing out. So it really was in some ways less of a choice and more of like, I've got to do this because I don't know what else to do. And so that's why I started going to see a counselor. And like I said, I think just the fate, when you're faced with your mortality, you're given a diagnosis of cancer or something like that. And thank God it was caught early. I haven't had any issues with it since. but still the idea of like how fragile life is and how quickly life can kind of turn on a dime. And if I'm not in the driver's seat of my own life, then what the hell's the point? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so that was, and I think I got really lucky in that I found a really good male counselor. There's not a lot of male counselors around. In fact, one of the things when I was going to school to work on my counseling degree, when I would go to class, 99% of the people in the class were women. It would
Yeah.
generally be me, maybe one other guy, but throughout all of my classes, it was a highly field of, that a lot of women are in. And that also made me concerned in terms of like, men having other men that they can talk to. Because I think a good woman counselor can absolutely be helpful. All right. But I think men only know what it's like to truly be a man and what some of the struggles are and things like that. And one of the reasons why I work with men is because I know what being a man is. I know how hard it can be sometimes and how challenging and sometimes fucking disappointing, um, in life. And like this isn't what I signed up for. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of men struggle with because they don't have anybody to talk to is they struggle with this feeling inside of this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I dreamed of. When I was a child and they said you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up, you know. And here I am, 35, 45 years old, and I am not doing what I thought I was going to be doing when I was, 10 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we're in relationships that are less than satisfying. We get married young, get married in our 20s, have kids, all of a sudden you wake up and you're 40 years old and you've got, high schoolers, you've been married for, 15, 20 years, and you realize like, I don't even know these people. You know, um,
Well,
and yet I'm working my ass off to try to serve them.
yeah. No, I hear you. And you're right. I mean, it is I think that because we tend to put on that strong face and that, that
Hmm.
mask, I think that we don't really get taken seriously if we do have a problem. And I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you just kind of like, most men, I think, I know me, maybe I am upset for a little bit, but I get over it pretty quickly, or at
Mhm.
least I say that I got over
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
and I move on to something else, right?
Right.
However, it's probably not gone, right? It's just
Yeah.
buried somewhere. And over
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
time,
that's what
things
we
just
tend to
kind of,
do, right? Yeah, as we tend to stuff things, I always kind of use the analogy as, something happens, we stuff it down. And pretty soon it's like trying to hold, three beach balls underwater at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah,
One of them is going to pop up someplace.
yeah,
And that's generally what happens with us guys is, we're trying to hold everything down and then something pops up, and that
yeah,
could be something like addiction, that could be something like an affair, that can be something like just being in uh being depressed,
yeah,
and then we don't know what to do with it. I
yeah,
think that a lot of this too is like men absolutely have let women down, and that that we talk a lot about toxicity or the toxic masculine.
yeah,
And I think that there's this underlining idea then that it's bad to be a man,
yeah,
don't be a man. Instead, you know, be more in tune with your feelings, be more, you know, feminine in a way. And I think that the message that being a man is bad is incorrect. And what I want to express to people is actually being a man is good. It's good. And when you come from a place of love and grace and compassion, that's strength that you can provide to the people around you. Now, what we all struggle with because we're human is we all have a shadow side. And so there's a shadow side to the masculine, just like there's a shadow to the feminine. What we want to be able to do then is embrace, you know, the parts of ourselves that is good as men and good as women and become well-balanced members of society. You know? But if you're constantly told you're you're bad or your gender's bad or you're toxic, then why would I want to identify with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then it's there's a huge contradiction too, because uh even though they tell us that masculinity is bad and we should be more in touch with our feelings and all that kind of stuff, it tends to be that when we do go to that side, we get ridiculed pretty hard
Hey,
from
yeah,
women,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And also from other men. So it's like,
uh-huh,
what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just,
yeah,
and that's probably leads to the next part of it, which is bring it down. Because can't
hmm
talk about that. If you bring that up,
yep,
well, then now you look weak. And what woman
yeah,
wants a weak man, right?
right, totally, yeah. I mean, I, yeah, think about it like this. So typical interaction, male female interaction. She comes to her husband, boyfriend, whatever, and says, I'm thinking about doing something, what do you think? And so the guy goes, oh, she's asking for my opinion. Let me
Yeah.
give her my opinion. So I say, well, this is what I think. And what she's really asking is not what do you think, but do you agree with me? You know? And then when he's like, well, okay, let me give you, you know, approach you as if you're a man, because if a man comes to me and asks for my opinion, it means he's seeking counsel. He wants to know. And then she gets upset because, you're not supporting me, you're not taking care of me, you're not listening to me, these kind of things. And so he says to himself, okay, next time she asks for my opinion, I'm not going to give it to her. I'm going to hide this part of myself instead. I'm going to, so she says, what do you think about this? He just is like, happy wife, happy life. Okay, yeah, whatever you want to do, babe, you know, at the expense of his own emotional needs.
Yeah. And then gets in trouble for that, for,
And they get in trouble for that.
being
Yeah.
sort of checked out, I guess, is
Right, right,
a lot of what they
exactly.
say, right?
Yeah.
But it's,
Yeah.
yeah, I know it's difficult. And then, but I mean, it's great that we now, men that are out there trying to help that. I'm sure that when you walked into your class, you probably got asked if you were in the right place.
I felt like that for sure.
99% of the women
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But awesome. So now on your journey though, I mean, not everything goes as planned. So was there any sort
Yeah.
of bad notes, that things that didn't
So,
work out so well that we can learn
yeah,
from?
lots. So many. Um, yeah, so the bad note was it's back in 2008. I'd been married for 19 years. We had our difficulties, and one of the difficulties was we have a daughter who has developmental disability. So
Yeah.
in her body, she's 33 years old, but in her brain and her mentality, she's really more of like a 9 or 10 year old. I would just kind of say she's forever young. And while that's a real blessing in many ways, that's also a lot of pressure as a parent. And so, when she was younger, that took a lot of toll on our relationship. Both my wife and I were raised very fundamental Christian in our background. And so one of the things that she struggled with was she um she's a lesbian. All right. Now, her religion and faith, that kind of thing, helped she repressed that down. Well, 19 years into the marriage, she came out as being gay,
Yeah.
which meant she didn't want to be with me anymore. And that kind of hit me out of left field and, broke my heart in terms of, the breaking up of the relationship in the marriage. And we had struggled so much through my cancer, through her depression, through my daughter's disability. Like here was just another big thing that happened. And the way I dealt with it, and this was actually before I became a therapist, um, was I numbed out. I drank, you know, and then I ended up just kind of like hooking up with the first woman that showed me any kind of attention because, my heart was broken and then I ended up actually marrying her. The ink on the divorce paper was hardly dry before I, married this next woman. And then because I was hiding all of this stuff about myself, pretending to be a nice guy when reality was I was really hurting inside and I was covering it up and I was hiding my drinking and hiding my addictions. And when all that came out, rightly so, she divorced me. And so I was, here I am, like within a year, married, divorced,
Wow.
and uh, and that's when I really kind of started moving into a program of recovery for myself. And part of that recovery was my journey of becoming a counselor, working with men, but also my own recovery from alcoholism and addictions and just being more honest with myself about who I am and and not hiding these parts of myself anymore.
Wow.
And I think that that was a huge turning point for me to be able to kind of look at myself clearly and go, I am like not going in the right direction. So what are you going to do different? And that was about the time in my life where I decided to make some significant changes. And also when, about the same time that I ended up graduating from grad school and becoming a therapist and opening up that. So all these things kind of happened simultaneously.
Wow. Well, so you've got some life experience to help
I
with
owe
other
them, yeah.
people, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and then let's move into that then. So tell me about how you get fans. How do you get people to even want to work with you?
Yeah. So, um, well, a number of ways. I mean, I obviously like people find out about me and the work that I do from, sometimes podcasts like this or, um, I have a YouTube channel, I have social media, that kind of thing. I also, part of the journey was in this time of recovery, I read this book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. And the book sort of, I was reading, it's like this guy has been following me around and writing my life story. And the premise of the book is the nice guy is actually not really a nice guy. Okay. The nice guy tells you what he thinks you want to hear. The
Yeah.
nice guy kind of hides his truth. Um, the nice guy goes ahead and does what he wants to do. And then when you call him on it, he was like, oh, I misunderstood. I didn't know what. Um, and so the nice guy really isn't nice. He is fraudulently nice. And that the opposite of a nice guy isn't a jerk. The opposite of a nice guy is what he calls an integrated man. An integrated man is somebody who likes himself, loves himself for, warts and all. He accepts himself as a man. He accepts his sexuality. He accepts his mistakes as well as his successes. And as I was reading through the book, I reached out to the author and was like, man, this book has changed my life. Thanks so much. And he was living in Seattle at the time, and he had a couple of different programs. One of his programs was to become a certified No More Mr. Nice Guy coach slash therapist. So I signed up for that, went up to Seattle, met with him, went through one of his trainings there. We got to know each other a little bit better there, and then over the course of some time, I started working with him um, in a couple different capacities. One is I kind of just he said, I get these emails all the time. He's like, I need somebody to answer them, but I need somebody who's qualified to answer them as well. Would you think about doing that? I'll pay you for it. I was like, absolutely. And
Wow.
then I helped him out and kind of assisted him on a couple of different his programs. And then about a year and a half ago, him, myself, and five other certified coaches, we built an online community called Integration Nation, which is for men um, to be able to come and talk about their nice guy tendencies. And Um, and it's been a really great experience in terms of, so a lot of guys will hear about me through the nice guy work. I also wrote an addendum to his book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, the 30-Day Recovery Journal, in which I take his 30 rules of nice guy recovery and I put that into a journal format where there's a reading and then some questions about it and then a place for guys to, write their own thoughts. So oftentimes guys will find me, they find his book, my book comes up and they find me and um, find me either through him generally or through, my other social media stuff, my podcast and things that I'm doing.
So that's actually a good strategy. So basically what you did is you found somebody in your space that was further along than you and asked if you
Yeah.
could help them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah. Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
And
And I mean, I highly recommend it. I mean, I think that people are oftentimes a whole lot more approachable and available than maybe you think they are. I mean, maybe you're not going to get Tony Robbins, right? But there's probably somebody who you've followed that has been an inspiration to you that when you reach out to them, they're like the most, helpful people. And maybe you found that as a musician. I mean, when you reach out to other
well,
musician,
it's
musicians.
100% to music. Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, there are clearly levels. I mean,
Yeah,
you've got like sort of beginner and then intermediate and
right,
expert. And maybe if you're a beginner, you're not going to be able to go straight to an expert and say, "Hey, can you teach me?"
right,
There's
right,
some steps you need to go through before you get
right,
there.
right.
But you can always find, someone who's just a little bit further than you are can help you along, right? And
Yeah,
and that sounds like what you did, right? You found
yeah,
somebody that was able
yeah,
to help you.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I'll just kind of throw out a little claim to fame here, when talking about musicians and everything.
Mhm.
Um, my brother-in-law is the guitarist for the band called Faith No More.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And and he's one of the most approachable guys I've ever met. You know, and I think that's the funny thing about, you would think that, I mean, I always tease him his rock star status is wasted on him because he, drives a Honda and lives pretty frugally. But he's just like super approachable. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes we put people up on a pedestal. Oh, I can't talk to them. They're famous or they have notary or something. And oftentimes if you just approach somebody from the standpoint of, hey, like I love what you're doing. Who doesn't want to hear that? And,
Yeah.
you know, how can I serve you in a way, that would be helpful, useful, you know? Um, and you
That's
find
great.
yourself
Yeah.
pretty soon like being in the same room as people that you once looked up to as, your heroes.
Absolutely. So now we already talked a lot about, learning from other people as well. Like, is there any like so you reached out to him. How did you get in touch with him in the first place?
He had a website, drglover.com. He had an
And you
email
just
address on
emailed him.
there. I just emailed him, you know,
Awesome.
and he was like, thanks for letting me know. Really appreciate it. You're a therapist. Maybe you'd be interested in doing my training sometime. I'm up in Seattle. I live in Portland. He's in Seattle, so it's like a 3-hour drive. It was like, okay, yeah, let's do this.
That's
And it
such a
was just,
great story.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
from a book too, like it's such so cool. And yeah, I think I think that's such a great story because you're right. I think people sort of look at these books and they think that, oh, there's no way that they're going to respond even. And
yeah,
I think the same thing. When I look at something, sometimes I'll go, oh yeah, they're not even going to respond, and they almost always do. It's
yeah,
actually
yeah,
rare that you contact somebody
right.
and no answer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, I mean, you might get an answer from an assistant or something along those lines,
It's
you
fine.
know, and that's fine. But, I think in general, a lot of people, most of these people that I know of anyway, like they read their emails and they ask, their assistant, hey, would you respond to this? Or they'll respond themselves. Mm.
Mhm. So let's move into a little bit about making sure that you're positive cash flow.
Yeah,
Keeping that full and all that stuff because
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
when it comes down to it that's one of the toughest things I think is making sure that you're pulling in enough money than you're spending. And that's
Right.
also when you're getting started, there sort of is a bit of an expectation that you might be in a little bit first, or is there?
Hmm.
Like, is there a way to be, positive cash flow right from the beginning?
Well, I guess what I usually would tell people is, unless you are independently wealthy, you probably need to make money.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I think it's a side hustle that then you work into being a full-time gig. And uh, you know, that what you want to be able to do is know that first of all, know what your value is.
Hmm.
Okay. So you have something of value. You know something that other people don't know, and other people will pay you for that knowledge. It may not seem like it, but there is, 7 billion people out in the world. So there's going to be a percentage of people who want the knowledge that you have. And you can take that knowledge and you can give it to the man, so to speak, and do your job and do all of that. Or you can decide to become an entrepreneur and either teach that or do whatever you've been doing for, somebody else on your own. I was watching this video the other day and the guy was saying, something about people saying, well, I'm not gonna work less for them what I'm worth. And he was basically saying, if you work for somebody else, you are working for less than you're worth simply because that person has to make a profit. And so
Yeah.
they're going to pay you less for what you do. So you're working for less than you're worth. So you might as well work for what you're worth, working for yourself. And I just, I found that to be true that if I'm working for somebody else, I'm giving them my service at a discount so they can sell that same service to somebody else at a profit. So why not do it for yourself? So creating positive cash flow, I think is, first of all, it's kind of a mindset, you know, oh, I don't have anything anybody would pay for. Oh, I don't have anything. I don't have anything, nobody would listen to me. These are the kind of things. Or I make too much money at this job to be able to quit and do the thing that I really like and love, which is why I think side hustles are a great place to start. So when I started out um, as a therapist, I was basically working three jobs. I was working at a community mental health facility, helping people with severe persistent mental illness. I was working at a hospital part-time as a counselor, and I was trying to build a practice on the side. So I basically was trying to work myself out of three jobs into just one.
Mhm.
So I got to the point where, I had Fridays off from my jobs. I figured out how to schedule that. So Friday was my day to see clients. And so I opened that up, and I started with, some online advertising, some Google ads, some, like Psychology Today has a therapist finder. And pretty soon people started saying, "Hey, I want to I want to talk to you. I need somebody to talk to." And then my Friday filled up. And so I was like, well, if I can fill it up Friday, maybe I can fill up another day. So I quit my weekend job and now I had Fridays and Saturdays that I was working. you know. And then when I got that falling up to a point, it was like, okay, I think I can do this now. Let's go ahead and make the leap. And it was a struggle. I mean, there were times, especially in those, the first couple of years where, I would have, I'd work whenever anybody wants. So I'd have a client at 8 a.m. in the morning and then, a client at 4 and then I'd have a client at 8 p.m., and something like that. And so
Yeah.
I'm like really working these long days. But pretty soon I was practiced enough and I had enough people coming in and coming to see me that I was able to, you know, to make my own schedule. So now I pretty much I see clients from about 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. and and then, I you know, do my other business stuff, whether, I've hired a team, as far as like accountants and somebody to do my billing and that, so that frees me up to be able to have more spaciousness in my life.
Nice. How long did that take, in terms of like, days or months or years or whatever to get from the point where you were just getting started to now full time?
Yeah, it took 2 years.
Two
And
years.
that was something, yeah. And that was also something that somebody else told me. I was talking to another person that had a private practice, and she said it takes about 2 years, you know, and and that was really true.
Yeah, you
Now,
know
that doesn't
what?
mean you're going to starve, but that means that and so again, it's important to have, whether it's a part-time job or, I had a spouse who was um, also helpful to me in terms of like um, uh, supporting me, you know.
Mm.
I was like, okay, I know you don't make as much as you will, but I know you will make more money. So, well, the finances will be a little bit lopsided for a little while, but I love you and I want to support you and I want to see you do this. So
Nice. Well, that's fortunate too.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Especially as men, we don't get that very
No,
often,
not often.
right?
Not often. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
found a good one.
Yeah. I got remarried again after about 3 years of um, wandering around and we've been married for 10 years now. And she's been amazingly supportive. And I think that's also, a little bit of side note on when it goes back to working with men, is uh oftentimes I'll say, men will spend like the most important financial decision you will ever make is your life partner.
Yeah.
And men, we will spend more time researching a computer that we think we're going to buy than we will like a relationship. You know? Um, so it's important to really seek out and find a relationship that where you feel really good about the partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredibly good advice. I'm divorced as well, and my
Yeah.
current partner is amazing.
Yeah.
And that was one of the realizations that I came to eventually was that I was looking for a woman that would be I called it a power couple. I just
Mhm.
wanted somebody who was gonna like work towards the same goals as me, and
Right.
it was more or less like from a like who is this person perspective. Whereas
Yeah.
when I was first when I was young, when I was just looking, a lot of men sort of make decisions just on looks, really, when it comes
Well,
down
yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Two
It's like
qualifications. Is she attractive and will she have sex with me? And if those two things are yeses, then yeah, let's go all in. Let's get married,
let's go for it. And then we sort of like, I remember just being, just super cocky, going like, it doesn't
Right.
matter. I'll be
Yeah.
able to make all the money, be fine.
Right.
She just has to do that, and we're good to go,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
then eventually you
Yeah.
get to the point where you're like, no, you know what? And even when you're speaking to, successful men, it's really rare that you find a very successful man that does not have a woman that is
So
like
true.
like like really supporting him, and not just like, so you know what I mean, like actually active in his life, and supports the decisions that he
Hmm.
makes, and actually doesn't goes out and makes his life easier, right?
Yeah.
uh
Yeah. Yeah.
and then when you
Yeah.
when you think about the men that are, sort of struggling, you tend to find the exact opposite, and their
Mhm.
women are making their lives harder, so they're
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
hiring
They're
more from
they
them, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a part in which we start to, feel powerless and feel depressed and get anxious and feel hopeless about our future, our marriages. We oftentimes will guys will get into a relationship, like I said, you can get into a relationship in your, 20s, 30s or something like that. And then, 10, 15 years goes by and all of your finances are enmeshed. You've got children that you're taking care of. And you find yourself in a relationship that really isn't complimentary anymore because you've
Yeah.
grown and changed, and so has she. And so, divorce isn't always a bad option. you know.
No.
I mean, it sometimes, and I look back on my marriages and I think I'm really grateful for them, you know, and I needed to go through those things in order to where I'm at today.
Yep. Me too. I agree 100%. It's all learning. And I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's the thing is that you don't really know who you are. I mean,
Yeah. You don't.
especially when we're getting together in our 20s, like you say, or
Yeah.
even in our teens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, after some life experience, you start to realize, okay, well, this is what I want in life.
Right.
And then you
Yeah.
find that your partner is like, well, no, what I want this.
Right.
And now what?
Exactly.
Right?
Now what? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, all right. It's time for your guest solo. So tell me what's exciting in your business.
Yeah. What's exciting, I think, is that I just wrote a book. Um, and it took me about 5 years to write this book. But I really, it's sort of like, my baby's the most beautiful baby in the world.
Hmm.
And I think this book is really, really good. And but essentially, it's a book about integrity. And one of the things I talk about with a lot of my guys is, when you're in pain, when you're depressed or anxious, generally it's because you've made compromises in your own values. And most of the time, we've never really sat down and defined what are my values. What is it that I find important? You know, Somebody might say, well, honesty. Oh yeah, I think honesty is really important. Courage. Yeah, I think courage is really important. Well, are you really courageous? Are you really honest? Well, I'm kind of honest is the answer I'll get. I'll say, well, okay, well, what ways are you dishonest? Well, I sometimes I'll make a mistake and I'll try to cover it up, or sometimes my wife will ask me a question and I'll give her a half truth, you know. Okay, so maybe you're not quite as honest as you thought you were. What about courage? Tell me about courage. Oh yeah, I'm really courageous. Like that's a high value for me. So when you were going to have a conversation with your wife about sex and money, how's that go? Oh, I try to avoid those topics at all costs. Why? Because I'm afraid of her reaction. Okay, are you really being courageous then? So we may think we have these values, but we've never really sat down and defined them. And so the book is called Finding Your Way Without Losing Yourself. A little copy here,
Oh,
and
nice.
The Path of Integrity. And it it's a framework for living in integrity. So there's 16 chapters, and the 16 chapters, each one covers a different um, a different virtue or value. So I'll just read them through quickly. So courage, assertiveness, tenacity, loyalty, wisdom, honesty, humility, generosity, temperance, excellence, patience, self-mastery, justice, empathy, grace, forgiveness. So as I was kind of trying to define values for myself, I was like, I want to come up with a list of values or virtues. And these were the ones that I came up with. And 16 is a lot to remember. So I usually tell people like pick five, pick five that are the ones that you're going to practice on. Um, but the book is essentially takes you through what each one of these virtues kind of what it means to me personally, things that I've found. And then secondly, to help you, the reader, think about, okay, what exactly is courage? What is humility? What does that mean? What does excellence actually mean? And to help you kind of define these values for yourself. Um, and then what I realized in writing the book was that all of these things that I just read are not natural things, which is why we struggle with them. It's not natural to be honest. It's not natural to be courageous. It's not natural it's natural to give up instead of having tenacity. It's natural to lie and cover things up instead of being honest. And so since the natural thing is really kind of the shadow of these virtues, we need a supernatural power to override
Hmm.
in order to do these things. And so I talk a lot about how integrity is actually a spiritual act. And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean God, Jesus, Buddha, Odin. I mean like what's important to me and where did these things come from, you know? And ultimately that the act of integrity is an act of love, and love is the most supernatural thing I think that we can do, because the natural thing is to not love. But when we are able to love, we're actually connecting with that spiritual part of ourselves. And so integrity is always an act of love for myself and for others. So I'm honest with myself and others. I'm courageous with myself and others. I have humility with myself and others, and I have grace with myself and others. So that's a nutshell version of the book. And what it, like I said, in its basic form, it's a framework for understanding and applying integrity into your life.
Yeah, wow, that's so deep.
I know,
I
yeah,
get,
yeah.
well, and I think when it comes down to it, I think a lot of uh, there's going to be some struggle, right, that you're going to have to go through. And
Yeah,
it's either you do it up front, right, and
yeah,
you have those difficult conversations with yourself and with
right.
others right away, or eventually they're going to creep up and they're not going to be under
Exactly.
your control, right?
And then it's going to be worse, and it's going to, and that's actually kind of like you know, the, it was the Buddha said something like, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Yeah.
That suffering is the bigger pain. The suffering
Yeah.
is thinking about this conversation that I need to have, but don't want to have, and ruminating about what may or may not happen. And I'm actually suffering in that, as opposed to just, I'm going to go practice courage and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And then it's
Yeah.
done, it's over, and you move on.
Yeah, and oftentimes, I mean, not all the time. Sometimes it actually is really terrible, but
Yeah.
oftentimes it's
Yeah.
actually less
Hey,
bad than you think it's going to be.
it's less, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I found. In general, it's going to be less painful than I really think it is. In fact, oftentimes I'm surprised that it wasn't painful at all. And
Mhm.
exact opposite was, oh, wow, I really grew and learned something in that.
Yep. And there's probably a pretty good correlation to how long you left it for.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
how difficult it ends up being. It ends up being more
Right.
difficult the longer you
Yeah.
leave it, right?
Exactly. Right. Because now it's like, not only do I have to like, address this thing that happened, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, oh, it's probably not worth addressing because it happened so long ago, and then that's one of those beach balls that pops up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you end up having to address now why you didn't bring it up 2 weeks ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Exactly.
know, you're doubling the things you have to
You're
now
done.
clean up,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Well,
I
awesome.
like that. I think clean up, that's the thing, right? Is like I'm just cleaning up. And in recovery we talk about cleaning up my side of the street, and that's what I think integrity is just keeping my side of the street clean.
Wow. So how do we find out more? How do we get this book?
Yeah. So yeah, you can get the book on Amazon. You can simply, you can search my name, Chuck Chapman. You can search Finding Your Way Without Losing Yourself. You can go to my website, which is chuckchapman.com, and we got a link there for Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Um, it's also where you can find information about my coaching. If you are a guy and you find yourself struggling and you want somebody to kind of give you some coaching, some tips, I
Mhm.
always say like I'm kind of a Sherpa, like I've been up the mountain a few times. I know where the pitfalls are, so I can help you kind of avoid some of those things in your life. You can find me. I have a YouTube channel where I do videos every week on the nice guy syndrome. Uh, so it's YouTube at Chuck Chapman. I also turn those into a podcast that you can download at your, pretty much any podcast. You can just search the Recovering Nice Guy on your favorite podcast app. You find me
Well,
there.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for rocking out with me today, Chuck. This has been a lot of fun.
Hey, Tim, thanks for having me as a guest artist.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it.
Right on. And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe, rate, and comment. We'll see you next time on the Work at Home Rockstar podcast.